Jeg er Martin. Tak.
Okay, tak.
Hjerteligt velkommen til anden dag i denne temasession. Indledningsvis vil jeg takke den norske delegation for.
I would like to thank the Norwegian delegation also on the future of the world of work. Now we will start the topical debate on hybrid threats and cyber security. And this is one of the focus areas of the Danish presidency program and one of the biggest challenges that our societies now face. The Nordic countries are at the forefront in terms of digitalization, and therefore we are also challenged by other societies that can influence and undermine democratic processes and elections, and also to bring critical infrastructure to a halt, paralyze defense capabilities, and also bring activities and citizen security in danger, and also to undermine trust in our society. And as you all know, trust is the Nordic gold. So the question here is, are the Nordic countries robust enough to face other countries and actors' attempts to influence our societies and democratic processes? We know that this was precisely one of the topics for both Mr. Putin's and President Biden's meeting recently. We are happy that the Nordic representatives of governments for the presidency of Finland, Iceland, Sweden, the Faroe Islands and Åland also participate in this meeting and debate along with observers and guests. And as we have decided at the opening of the theme sessions, then there are some special rules that apply for speaking during this debate. Each representatives of government have 5 minutes for the introduction, and then we will open the floor for observers, guests and members to participate in the debate. And for observers and guests, the following rules apply. Namely, that the allotted speaking times for the representatives of the Baltic Assembly, West Nordic Council, the Sami Parliamentarian Council, and the Nordic Youth Council and Björn Bjarnason is 2 minutes. And the same applies to members of the Nordic Council. They also have a speaking time of 2 minutes. For both ministers, members, observers and guests, they have the opportunity to ask for a reply. And then the person that they direct the reply to have 1 minute. And if you want to ask for the floor for a reply, please press the button raise hand. Because when you see under reactions, then you can find the raise hand icon. First, I would like to give the floor to the Baltic Assembly. Since the president of the Baltic Assembly is not able to participate during the entire debate, it is my great pleasure to give the floor to the president of the Baltic Assembly, Andrius Kupčinskas. Please, Andrius, you have the floor. 2 minutes.
I'm not Andrius Kupčinskas. I have to say very sorry. There was an urgent voting in Lithuanian parliament, and he's going to be here in 10 minutes.
Fint. Så går jeg videre i talerlisten og giver ordet til Finlands kommunikationsminister, Timo Harakka, som har 5 minutter. Værsgo, Timo.
Timo, can you hear me? Yes, the interpreter does not have any audio from Timo Harakka at the moment. We are waiting. Chair, should we then ask Jørgen Niklasen of the Faroe Islands? If he is ready, then we can hear him, and then we can give the floor back to Timo Harakka. Jørgen Niklasen, we will start by you. because you are ready. You have the floor. Yes, dear Nordic friends, I am not always sure which language to speak, but I believe that it will be a tolerable Danish, but resembling Norwegian. And cheers, commends him for his Danish. But first I would like to thank you for this opportunity to participate in this debate. And the topic is important because in the Nordic countries I want us to cooperate on cybersecurity, and that the Nordic countries can also draw on each other's experiences. When I was a young boy, we took the phone and then dialed the number to the switchboard. I said that I want to speak to my grandmother. And of course, all conversations were listened in on. So, of course, if you wanted to know something, you could simply ask the exchange. When I started work, we had telex. Some years later, we had a telefax. Wonderful. But today, everything goes on online. And this means that it's important to collaborate on security issues because our societies can't work without cyber networks. And it affects both law enforcement and judicial service, private companies, the public services. And our public telecom company made a huge effort in the area on cybersecurity, and on a daily basis they block attacks on our cyber structure. We are a small country, 53,000 inhabitants, but in 2019 our telecom company blocked 2.2 million virus-infested emails so that they could never do any damage. They are blocking 34.5 million attempts from hackers to log onto network systems on the Faroe Islands. And also very serious attempts have been stopped. So we have seen a very significant increase in attempts to attack our network. And during the COVID period, we've also seen fewer attempts. But it also shows how our efforts on the cyber area have been effective. Our telecom company also works closely with our public IT companies and also the police at the Faroe Islands. The hope is that both the citizens, public services, and also our network systems should be protected. And of course, collaboration would make it easier to protect us. But networks also mean that it will be easier to make our functioners dysfunctional. We know from Estonia to use systems to communicate between various systems of authorities. Our authorities are to an increasing tendency required and dependent on using the systems, and attacks can also paralyze the Faroe Island society sooner or later. How quickly that will happen is also dependent on how well prepared we are, how much we can resist, and therefore it's very important to have sufficient cybersecurity. We have guidelines and rules for all public authorities in the area of cybersecurity. We have our own telecom company that also fights cyber attacks. but we don't have any legislation in this area. But we are now considering whether we should have an act that will enable us to regulate the system. So far, we have fared well, but of course, the ramifications are very serious if something happens. That's all. Timo Haraka, have you now been able to log on? Do you want to try? Yes, I think I have now hit the right buttons. Can you hear me? And friends and members of the Nordic Council, various functions in our societies are closely connected to the outside world where we act, and we need to secure our communication. Digital services have become increasingly important during the pandemic too. We have new technologies, and there are many security political issues that are linked to them, and that affects both the EU communications and the international arena. So we need to think about cybersecurity. Within the European Union, something happened. The interpreters are not receiving any audio suddenly. We're standing by. Yes, you can hear me now, speaker says. Yes. Yes. Good, you can hear me now. Like I said, Finland has prioritized 2019 during our presidency of the European Union that we should have a common approach, a toolbox that we should use, and we have also taken initiatives to national legislation to complement our rules. When we now start using new rules, it is important that we can also trust the services we use, and everyone needs to understand how important it is to ensure that they are secure. And therefore, we also need to put measures in place in time. And also think about enterprises and businesses, because they must also be able to use new technology in a safe way, and also for various actors to collaborate, because cyber security requires a very close collaboration between public authorities and the private sector, and we need to have the whole society on board when we work to fight new attacks. New legislation have also resulted in some amendments. The government has recently also adopted some concrete measures that serves to improve cybersecurity. The first one is, for example, that we talk about a cyber defense. The Ministry of Defense and Ministry of the Interior will also be considering the various rules and decisions made in order to build up a thorough and sufficient cyber defense. There's also another decisions that has to do with critical services, cybersecurity, and we need a close collaboration between various agencies when we have attacks, and also to think how authorities can help once there is a problem. We also want to ensure that all data and cyber security issues are subject to legislation. We need both to work regionally, multilaterally and bilaterally, and the Nordic collaboration is also important in this context. And what is important, that the whole administration participates in the work done. We have a general model that we use. Critical functions needs to be protected in all circumstances. And also, international cooperation is important, but we must not forget also the work done among the citizens and their institutions. And we need to strengthen our resilience. Only then can we react to various hybrid actions and activities taken. And we also need Nordic collaboration towards this end. We saw a report yesterday, and we've been able to identify hybrid threats as an important area for our cooperation. Unfortunately, the Finnish interpreter is losing audio. We're just standing by. Meeting chair is trying to tell that, we are not hearing you. And ask Timo Haraka to rejoin the meeting afterwards and come back. We are now giving the floor to Mikael Damberg, the Swedish Minister of Interior. Thank you, Nordic friends. Our Nordic and Baltic states have been at the forefront of digitalization. As early as when I was a minister, we see clearly how digitizations and technical developments have been driving force behind the growth and digitalization in our countries, but it has also made us more vulnerable. Threats in the form of cyber attacks, sophisticated collation of data, incidents that relies more on, for example, human error, either that you have human error or management, or that you also have old systems, and attacks against our cyber structure can have serious ramifications. Thinking about security must be a natural and critical way of thinking about our activities at all levels, including at leadership. We have a cyber security center that Sweden is successively now developing. We have then developed cooperation during the year between all authorities, and the aim is to prevent, identify and manage the antagonistic cyber attacks, and the collaboration between private and public actors are very important. A stronger international cooperation is very important for Sweden, and we work intensively in many areas, both in the European Union, bilaterally, and between our Nordic countries. The Nordic countries functions to manage IT-related incidents in the critical activities. Have already been collaborating constructively, and we know that there are also anti-state attacks where a foreign state is behind the attacks, will try to influence and also try to force them to act in a certain way, hybrid threats. In Sweden, we see it's more complex situations. We also see links between military and private areas, and we've also seen that cyber attacks, such as the Russian attacks against Ukraine, have also shown that it is important to collaborate because disinformations and also collection of information are examples of cyber threats, hybrid threats. The COVID pandemic have also increased disinformation and fake news in Europe, and also try to influence discussions in the European Union. And we need to take an overarching perspective of this and also try to identify and manage security threats. And therefore, we need a more expanded collaborations. We have taken steps in Sweden to strengthen and we have also proposed a bill to invest resources in both the military side and public, and we have a new authority for psychological warfare that we will be initiating work on next year. And also we need to collaborate both regarding our neighbouring area, the European Union, and also the general society that we are part of. And national policies and measures are needed, also based on national interests perspective, but we also need to look at this collectively within the EU and from other countries to actually also deal with some of these threats, because this is cross-border threats. Thank you. We need the Nordic cooperation here. Thank you. Timo Haraka, if you want to finish your speech, then please do so. We didn't hear the last session, because if that is the case, you are welcome to ask for the floors, but you can also ask for it later. Do you want to come on now? Timo? Yes, can you hear me now? All right. I had almost finished, but what I wanted to say is that cybersecurity and the trust in services are very important. And therefore, cybersecurity cannot be something that is left to voluntary efforts. Even though trust economy is important, and it will also help to strengthen some of the important and positive aspects we offer here in the Nordics. Thank you for your final point. Thanks to all the three ministers. We are now moving to a series of 2-minute speeches, and I will start by the President of the Sami Parliamentary Council, Aili Keskitalo. You have the floor. Uri baby, hello, my Nordic friends. I will be talking on behalf of the Sami Parliamentary Council, and that is the collaboration agency between Samis in the Nordic, Norway, Sweden and Finnish, and we also collaborate with Sami bodies in Russia, and Norway has the presidency here. I have 2 messages. The first one is that the first digital society has significantly improved the Sami people's possibility to have contact with and to exchange information across the whole Sami area, also cross-border communication and even to Russia. Since we live sparsely and in rural areas, then good and safe, secure communication online is very important. Our challenges are mainly linked to the fact that we live in rural areas and don't always have sufficiently good connections, and that digital solutions are not always adapted to our language needs. So communication via cyberspace is particularly important to us, also when it comes to contact with other indigenous people internationally. Therefore, we also focus on cybersecurity. It is important to us. My second point is that our contact between indigenous people and Samis across borders must not be looked at as a security risk, but as a contribution towards mutual trust. We have been subject of suspicion over the years, and we want cybersecurity to be harmonized among all the Nordic states and not intervene in our needs to use the technological tools that are available to communicate and cooperate. Thank you. Kito. Thank you, Ailo, for your clear messages. Next, let's move to the representatives of the West Nordic Council, Edvard Jacobson. Thank you, dear Nordic friends. It is a great honor to us for the first time to participate at the theme session of the Nordic Councils. We are happy to be able to participate in the theme sessions from now on, even though we are slightly sad that we can't meet in persons with you in Norway. In English, we talk about a special relationship, and the cooperation between West Nordic Council and the Nordic Council has always been close and good between friends and collaboration partners in the Nordics and Western Nordic countries. This year we celebrate our 15th year anniversary for our collaboration agreement, which back then formalized a close cooperation that exists between the councils. The councils agreed to use the anniversary to update the agreement to see how the cooperation between the councils can be further developed going forward, or how the measures in the existing agreement can better be activated. A new updated agreement will be signed in connection with the Council's joint presidium meetings during the Nordic Council sessions in 2021. We follow with great interest the ongoing debate here at this meeting regarding hybrid threats and cyber security, and share the concerns for the challenges that we face, because these are important issues. We also strongly support joint Nordic solutions that needs to be the answer to our challenges, and this means that we will continually have to fight for our open and strong societies, democracy and solidarity. Thank you. Thank you, Eva Jacobson. I hope that your wish will be fulfilled. Next, I want to give the floor to Bjørn Bjarnason. He is a special person because the Nordic Council of Ministers asked him to make a report to advise politicians of how we should relate to the future threats regarding cybersecurity. I am now happy to give the floor to Bjørn Bjarnason, a former Icelandic Minister of Justice. And because you also penned the report, I will be liberal if you need some extra time. Bjørn Bjarnason, I give the floor. Hello. Thank you. And dear Nordic friends, when we discuss cyber threats and cyber defense, we should bear in mind that attacks are usually carried out in such a way that it's almost impossible to identify and find the attacker. And very often they say that the attack is not that serious, that it provokes reactions that are public and harsh, but this is not always the case. Within each state, all administration must be mobilized to fight against multi-level and cyber threats. Organizations that may not have a tradition for cooperations need to do so under these new dangerous circumstances, because in the cyber world, data is stored in the public sector while the equipment is manufactured by private parties. Data and protection of devices therefore must be a joint project that requires new methods and resources. At the same time as the Nordic network, defenses also look to focus on what goes on in each country. Then a close five-state cooperation in these fields may also increase security and opportunities for external defense. There is a great danger if a superpower in the field of hybrid threats also manage to isolate a small, friendless nation in cyberspace, because if you're able to rely on the solidarity of neighboring nations, it will have a deterrent. It will deter cyber defense, and also it will be worse to have it criticized by 5 nations instead of 1. And an attack on one or all of them can easily also be described as an attempt at democratic governance. A joint defense will not be possible without thorough discussions between government and politicians. And therefore it's important that the Nordic Council has put this issue on its agenda and also send a clear political message and demand a common targeted response to cyber attacks and hybrid threats. Thank you. Thank you, Bjørn Bjarnason. Thank you for your statement with a clear message that we need to be solidaric regarding cyber threats. And also, thank you for your report.
Interesse. Jeg giver nu ordet til.
I will now give the floor to our last guest, the President of the Nordic Youth Council, Aldis Mjøl Geirsdottir. The floor is yours, Aldis. Dear Nordic friends, we are in the middle of a pandemic, and during this last year it's been very obvious to us how important it is for the Nordic countries to collaborate. The Nordic Youth Council has transmitted a resolution where we are talking about cyber defense and cyber attacks. Because of an increasing risk for cyber attacks, we have an increased need also for defense, which is why the Nordic countries should collaborate very closely on this matter and bring forward strong laws and a good international cooperation. We've also seen that a several number of states have tried to influence the public's attitude and opinions by spreading fake news through the public. This is a huge challenge, and no country can solve this problem on their own. And the development is very quick, and we will have to continue working on this. The Nordic Youth Council has asked for a conference on cybersecurity where one should talk about Nordic infrastructure and protection against attacks. The world is constantly changing and rapidly changing. We need to take a new step in order to protect our collaboration. We are subject to huge crisis and cyber attacks, but we need to use the knowledge that we have and our emergency planning. The Nordic countries should implement the solutions that they have decided in a better fashion than today. I'm thinking about the Nordics Council strategy for public security that was adopted in 2019. All these threats are cross-border issues, and if we want to be the most integrated region in the world, it's extremely important for us to collaborate in this area. Thank you very much. Thank you, Aldis, for your intervention, and thank you also for the resolution transmitted by the Nordic Youth Council. Now I want to give the floor to the party groups and their spokespersons, and I will start by giving the floor to Martin Kolberg. Thank you for the conference we had just before lunch, and I now give you the floor as the spokesperson for the Social Democratic Group, and you have 2 minutes. Thank you very much, Bertel. I will first of all say that I believe that we all agree on what has been said so far. We agree that this is a big threat. We need to see the historical perspective here, which is that the technological development that we need in society and the blessing that this new technology is for all our societies, it also leads to criminality, and warfare is going into a new direction. And before I was going to speak, I was wondering, can I use the word warfare? But I am doing so. We are facing a new kind of criminality, but also a new form of warfare. And if I use that word, it's because has been proved, and we know that many of the heavy attacks against the house where I'm sitting now, the Norwegian Parliament, Storting, has been conducted by states, and against us by the Russian state. So this speaks a lot to the new dimension that this has taken. So I can't say much about this during 2 minutes. All I can say is that we need to stand together, and the Nordic Council must be in the forefront in the struggle against this. And together with our government, we need to make a Nordic plan in order to tackle this in the best possible way. So that is very briefly my message, and the message we've heard, which I'm completely in agreement with. We need to collaborate within the police, the defense, and also the collaboration that we have in the EU and in NATO. And the Nordic Council has to back this. We need to take initiatives, we need to respect each other, and we have to see that this is a democratic struggle. That's what it's all about. Thank you very much, Martin Kolberg. And what you have said here, you've said it on behalf of the Presidium. I think there is a reply from Christian Juhl. Yes, thank you. Martin said that we are waging a war, but I'd like to ask him how he looks upon the need of international agreements on cyber technologies and communications. We have laws and rules on how to wage a war. We have rules on how you should keep your nuclear weapons and so forth. Isn't it about time that we also get international agreements on this area? I think the debate we had yesterday showed that it's not only our so-called political enemies, China and Russia, but also our allied. You have been on the phones in Norway have been tapped by our allies, the US, and so we need to look into that as well. So I don't think what you think about this, Martin. Martin Kolberg. Christian and I agreed yesterday how unacceptable it is also for our friends to use this new technology to espionage our political processes. This is completely unacceptable. And it's implicit in what I'm saying, Christian, on behalf of the Social Democratic Group and also on behalf of the Presidium, as Bertel just said, that we need to work to get international rules in this area. But we also need to work on the morals in this area, because even if we have rules, they will not be respected if that is in the interest of those who do so. So it's very important that we have an international morality so that you do not abuse of this technology in order to undermine the democracy. And if I speak about warfare, it's because this is a new kind of warfare we're seeing. It's completely different from traditional warfare. That's why I use this word, but apart from that, I agree with you, Christian Juhl. And you have 1 minute. Very briefly, Martin, people are talking about the big differences we see in the Nordics. I agree with that. But we also have intelligence services that use methods that are more regulated than what we see. But the confidence and the trust that we have in our countries is not sufficient. We need to ask the UN and other international organizations for concrete rules in this area. But apart from that, thank you very much. Yes, I just want to say it's perhaps a problem with the sound here, but I did say that I agree that we need rules. But I also said that we need a moral compass here. It's not enough to have rules, Christian, if people benefit from breaking these rules. Thank you for this discussion. Let's now move on to the representatives of the parties. Perana Hawkinson from the Social Democratic Group. The floor is yours, Perana. Yes, thank you. A big part of our daily lives are taking place in the digital world and on the internet. This represents, of course, opportunities, but also huge risks, both for the personal security and integrity, but also for the democratic society that we have in the Nordics. It is important to use the technology in favor of people, and that goes also for the cyber security, and that we do this in a cross-border fashion in order to enhance the collaboration. We need to have a collaboration between the states, but also between businesses and other social functions. And as far as I can tell from the perspective of the Nordic Council, it's important that we also have an awareness and knowledge amongst the public around these issues, and that they understand that these are important questions. I'm thinking about municipalities, small business, and also the spaces where we move in our daily lives. We've recently heard descriptions from the verification, the national verificator in Sweden, who who had looked into what had happened with cybersecurity the last few years, and he underscores the importance of cybersecurity. And I want to say that EU's cybersecurity wants to enhance the security, reduce the criminality, and also establish a cyber defense. This is the EU's policy, and I think it's very important for us to work also on these issues and matters in the Nordic cooperation and collaboration. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Joni Ovaska on behalf of the Center Group. Thank you. Thank you very much. This is, of course, a very serious issue for us, but I think we're lacking some tools. We don't have any institution that could work actively on these matters. We are all subject to these attacks. As the previous speaker said, we could talk about a warfare here. As states and members of the Nordic Council, we are very prudent when we talk about who can be behind these attacks, but often we talk about states as actors here. But on the other hand, one could ask oneself how we could promote the cyber diplomacy. We have the nuclear diplomacy, and we've even been talking about peace promoting diplomacy. So why couldn't we also talk about the cyber diplomacy? Even Putin and Joe Biden talked about the fact that critical infrastructures should be excluded from these attacks. But I think it is difficult to progress in this area because we don't have the necessary tools. On behalf of the Center Group, I'd like to ask the ministers on how are you going to implement these suggestions that one can see in the Bjørnarson report? Kiitos, Joni. Let's see if there are anyone who wants to give you an answer. I don't think so. So I give the floor to the spokesperson for the Conservative Group, Paul Jonsson. Thank you very much, President. The hybrid threats are increasing, and the pandemic has put them on steroid. And we need to take. There are methods that is in a blurry zone between total peace and total war. The war is the switch that puts the security policy off or on. So it's possible to use or intensify these hybrid threats and then lower them. When we see that this is going on 24/7, and like Bjarnason said in his important report, these are threats that we get from Russia and China, and there is a superpower rivalry between these countries. So we need to take this seriously and work together and individually in order to reinforce our defense against these threats. On the national level, we need to work systematically in all government areas, whole approach. But there must also be a close collaboration between the private and the public sector, because many of our critical infrastructures today are in the hands of private businesses. Nordic is the world's most digitized region, and our digital infrastructure is very connected. So we need to deepen the collaboration between the Nordic countries on the cybersecurity area, not only because this is something we want to do, but it is completely decisive for our joint security. And it thinks also that we need to strengthen and deepen the collaboration with EU and NATO. And we are in the same boat all together when it comes to all these threats and cybersecurity. Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to Høgni Høydal, spokesperson for Nordic Green Left. President, dear friends, and Bjarnason, when we, during the last century, witnessed a lot of coup d'etat in the world, it wasn't only the president palaces or the critical infrastructures that were conquered, it was only TV stations and radio stations. This is the past. Today, you can take over the power by the internet. And I think that is something which is increasingly taking place. It's important to talk about hybrid warfare, but one should be prudent to use these military notions, because if you talk about warfare, it's not only warfare between traditional states, but also against private businesses, political parties, and private persons. Which is why I mean that the Bjarnason report, item 8, is the most important for the Nordic countries, namely how we can implement or elaborate democratic rules on the cyber area by basing this on Nordic values, equality, democracy, and connect this to cybersecurity. I also want to say that the EU's General Data Protection Directive introduced in Norway is not good enough. I think the Nordic countries should take action in order to protect the individuals. We also have a kind of a new colonialism. Denmark has said to the Faroe Islands that we need to take over the responsibility for the critical infrastructures based on military considerations. We do not accept this. We need to stand together and promote security, private life, and integrity when we are working on this cybersecurity. Thank you very much, Høgni Høydal. I now give the floor to Aron Emilsson, Nordic Freedom. You have the floor, Aron. Thank you, President. Yes, Nordic case is our joint responsibility. Hybrid threats and the dominance position of business, technological business, is big challenges that we need to tackle. And we have our tradition for freedom. We see sabotage and other espionage matters against infrastructures. We need to stand together, and we need to join our forces and coordinate both strategies, has been said by previous speakers. But I also think that we need new tools here. We need to harmonize this within the EU legislation and a joint implementation as far as that is possible, both nationally and also international. We need to work together with the Baltic countries and go against authoritarian nations like China and Russia. We need to stand together, both within our organization and other organizations. There are a few positive aspects, but we also have negative aspects of this, because actors can take control over the internet and needs to be regulated. We have a very bad incoming audio, but we do, of course, our best here. We need to protect and safeguard the collective and individual integrity in the long run. Thank you very much. Now we will hear from the President of the Baltic Assembly, Andrius Kopčinskas. He should have been speaking at the beginning of this session, but he is with us now, and I give the floor to you, Andrius. Yes. You can also speak even if we can't see you on camera. All right. So I will give the floor to Jānis Vukans, which is his colleague. Many of us know Jānis. You have the floor. You have 2 minutes.
Of the Nordic Council, thank you for inviting the members of the Baltic Assembly to participate in your team session. Both topics, hybrid threats and cybersecurity, as well as emergency preparedness, are very important for the Baltic states and also for the work of the Baltic Assembly. We have addressed both of these topics during our meetings and events, including our recent trilateral conference of the Baltic Assembly, the Benelux Parliament and Nordic Council. I hope that my colleague Andrius will have possibility to tell a little bit more about that. But now I want to elaborate on a particular form of hybrid threat, namely disinformation campaigns that are widespread in the Baltic states. Here, the goal is to achieve societal resilience. It must be addressed because political uncertainty is not only highly possible, but also is dangerous as a military intervention. The COVID-19 pandemic showed how difficult it is to communicate with some parts of the society. In the Baltic states, there are still parts of the society that deeply mistrust our governments and their decisions. That is worrying, and particular attention has to be paid to address this issue. Communication with society is extremely important, especially within a fragmented political landscape and about questions that unite the whole society. Informing and engaging are important elements. Everything starts at home, at a societal level, with questions sensitive and delicate within the societies. We believe that a population trained to identify bias and mistrust in their governments is the best defense against harmful propaganda. Thank you very much.
Tusind tak, Jānis Vukans. Dejligt, at du kan deltage. Og nu vil jeg give ordet til din kollega.
Thank you very much, Yannis. Now I give the floor to Yannis Tirtus, Vice President of the Security Committee from Estonia. You have the floor, Titus.
Fra Estland.
At this point, we all know that the benefits of cooperation regarding hybrid threats, including cyber attacks, are obvious. I want to elaborate on cybersecurity and the experience of the Baltic states. You all know that the Baltic states, unfortunately, are quite familiar with hybrid warfare and cyber threats. We are always open to share our knowledge in these areas and also strongly believe that cooperation in the area of cybersecurity between the regions will serve the interests of all our countries. In 2004, Estonia proposed to NATO to create the Cyber Defense Center of Excellence. In 2007, Estonia was the first target of a nation-on-nation cyber attack, and it became clear that the center is extremely important. Before that, there was no such concept as an attack in cyberspace. There were no clear positions on international law, and the world had to start reinventing these aspects. The growing threat was obvious to professionals earlier, though. As early as 1990, the US National Academy of Sciences began a report on computer security with the words, "Tomorrow's terrorist may be able to do more damage with a keyboard than with a bomb." The situation has changed drastically since 2007. Now we are very proud of this center and understand very well the importance of investing in cybersecurity. Dear colleagues, we need to keep talking about the hybrid threats and cybersecurity issues, and not just talking. We need to ensure training of wide audience in basic cyber hygiene and give top-level training to cybersecurity professionals. And above all, we need to enhance our cooperation because we know quite well that hybrid and cyber threats know no borders. Thank you.
Så det gør vi nu. Pause nu.
That's all. Thank you.
Tusind tak. Vi er i Nordisk Råd særligt glade for disse hilsner, vi har fået.
Thank you very much. The Nordic country appreciates the messages from these Baltic countries. They really know what they're talking about when they talk about cyber threats. We will now have a short break, a 10 minutes break, and after that we will resume our discussion. Perhaps some of the ministers would like to ask or answer the questions raised on how they want to implement the proposals from Björn Bjarnason, namely establish a Nordic-Baltic common protection against cyber attacks. So let's resume again in 10 minutes. We need to take a break now because of the interpreters. And we will resume again at 13:37. Thank you.
Sætter nu debatten.
We are now ready to continue the debate on cybersecurity. And some questions have been put regarding to the proposals of the Bjarnason report and how governments want to implement them. And I believe that one proposal was number 8 about solutions based on solidarity between the Nordic countries and the Nordics and the Baltic states. Are there one or two ministers who may want to express any views on such proposals? That does not seem to be the case. Next, I want to ask if anyone else would like to take the floor. That does not seem to be the case either. And that is probably because we're all in agreement that it is of general agreement that we should all be acting on solidarity. Christian Juhl, I think this is such an important issue, and therefore it's a bit surprising that there are no more kind of views expressed here. I think that the idea is very good that some people have put forward, namely that the Nordic cooperation and also the Baltic cooperations can help us find some sustainable solutions, because Finland and the Baltic states have also, at least some of them, have worked on these matters already. But we still have the trust that we need in order to design and develop common rules. And even though we cannot talk and compare war with the attacks we've seen so far, then we need to align our approaches, and we need to show that we are able to design such rules, and also to try to work through the United Nations to see if we can make global solutions. And it is the first time that we have achieved a ban on nuclear weapons since 1945. We have so far developed global solutions to identify where the arms are. But still, there is a nuclear capability, and also it affects its terror balance. But small countries can take initiatives because they have trust and confidence between each other, and it's also important that we make demands. And it's also regarding the collaboration between President Putin and President Biden. Maybe we could also use that. If women and men kind of reaches out for each other and say that we all need to survive on this planet, and therefore we need to regulate affairs between us in such a way that we don't destroy each other. There must be a rationale kind of inside the head of each political leader, each common sense man and woman to work towards that end. We should kind of reach out, and I think that's the only way we can do to make progress, because we don't have any powers to kind of force this onto others, but it's all in our common interest to deter attacks. And I believe we should tell our ministers that they address Bjørn Bjarnason's recommendations in a serious matter, and also that we can work how to proceed on these matters. I'm sorry if I spent too much time, but we need to demand from our ministers that we actually can agree on future solutions that can be used for some purpose. All right, we have new speakers, and after those speakers, I would like to ask Bjørn Bjarnason to respond. First speaker, you have 1 minute. Thank you. Thinking that I thought it was a bit strange what I heard, but I would like also to respond to Mikael Danberg when he talked about the structure that they are building up, and also to allow some minor actors to collaborate. I believe it's important that other Nordic countries can develop a similar structure so that we can actually have some interactions in a good manner. But we perhaps need a coordinated strategy on how to face and approach cyber threats. We have some indications in Bjarnason's report, but I believe that it's important that we also have a common agency or authority at a national level. All right, next speaker, Joni Hovarska. Yes, here I would like to add to what I said earlier. It's I'm sad that the ministers could tell us more about how we can implement and realize Bjørn Bjarnason's recommendations, but I hope that we can send some strong messages to ministers that we expect some real and concrete measures to work together. We work within the European Union, and United Nations was also mentioned, but ministers now need to intensify efforts and to build up something new. Otherwise, we will be one step behind everyone else who really exercise these threats. Thank you. Next speaker, 1 minute. Høgni Høydal. Yes, thank you. I agree with Christian Juhl, and that we also would have wanted a response from ministers. I'm also sad that the Danish minister is not participating in the debate, because Bjarnason's report gives some concrete recommendations, and I believe that number 8, the way we approach cybersecurity is very important, and also the Nordic Declaration on Solidarity is very important. It's more or less the same as NATO's. An attack on one country is deemed as an attack on everyone, so that everyone responds. But again, I would like to reiterate that we're dealing with private players that actually provide and supply these services, and we also need an international convention to put in place, like Christian said, and the Nordic countries should also try to take initiatives and pave the way for such a convention. Thank you. I was called by the Danish Minister for Cooperation, and because he had to accompany a royal delegation, he was not able to attend this and participate in this debate. But I've also seen that the Finnish minister, who is president of the Ministers for Cooperation, has asked for the floor. Yes, thank you. We have heard some comments whether or not we are at war or not, but the amendments we've done in Sweden is that we've seen that a cyber attack could have similar ramification as a war attack, but we should not undermine this. The cyber dimension is about 3 S's. It's about theft, espionage, and that is what we dealing with. The second is also regarding conventions and international approaches, and we do have some, and there's an active process. We know that Russia is trying to also initiate legislative efforts to put in place legislation on the cyber issues, and I believe that there's also international efforts to kind of link the national efforts to the United Nations one. All right, I now give the floor to Timo Haraka, who I'm happy to see is with us. Timo, you have the floor. We are waiting to get audio from Timo Haraka. We have temporarily lost audio from Timo Haraka, and I'm now giving the floor to Björn if he has some comments to what he's heard so far. Björn Bjarnason. Yes, I would like to thank the representatives and the battle and the good response I've had to my report, and as you see from the report and in my proposals, we focus on the Nordic countries to stand still shoulder by shoulder, also because the nature of these risks and threats, and it's also important that the Nordic countries face these attacks together. There's been a question whether or not we should talk about this as a war, an act of war, or a threat, or an attack. But I believe a couple of places in my report we term it as war. And my proposals also reflect on what I heard from the meetings in the Nordic capitals and how they actually talked about this, and then there was a focus on seeing this as a war, and that is also why I use the word war or warfare in my report. But as always, when we discuss this issue, there is a question: why do you use the war term? Why do you use this very strong word? But I think it is necessary if we are to understand the serious nature of such a threat, and I cannot stress it strongly enough how important it is for us in small countries, especially Iceland, and also to the friends in the Baltics and the Nordics, that we stand together to analyze and to respond to the attacks. First of all, it's political attacks. It's done for the purpose of creating disruption in our societies, and the more that support those subject to attacks, the stronger we are. I think that is the most important message. But in the proposals, I also say that my proposals were received positively by the ministers, and there's a positive trend in the countries to use the proposals and to follow up. And I expect that this is also done in some form. And it is interesting to hear about the work that is gone, but I assume that the work has already started. I would like to thank you for inviting me to this meeting, and also to the Nordic Council for the way you have addressed this issue. A follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Bjarnason. Timo Haraka, are you with us now? Can you hear us? Timo. He is still struggling with joining the meeting, so maybe we cannot hear him. But I would like to thank you warmly for the debate, and another warm thanks to Mr. Bjarnason also for his very clear last message to us. I would also like to make sure that we follow up vis-à-vis the ministers responsible for public security, so that we can get their response to how they intend to follow up the report and also to follow up this debate here. We did discuss security in connection with the long session last year in November. And we were not back then very satisfied with the reactions from the ministers. I'm glad that we've had some responses today, but what we lack is some message from the ministers responsible for public security, how they intend to follow up this debate and also to follow up Bjørn Bjarnason's report to create the solidaric protection that more or less everyone seems to agree on that we need in the Nordic countries and also with our Baltic friends. And I apologize to Timo Haraka that he was not able to join this meeting now the second time, but we need to move on in our program. Odni Haradatir has asked for the floor, and you have the floor, Odni. Yes, hello everyone. Unfortunately, I joined the meeting a bit late because I needed to take my vaccine. So now I've got my shot so that I can participate. But we agree with everything that's been said in the Icelandic delegation. We need to go through to analyze and also to have a common response to hybrid threats. We have had a clear response and reactions from the Nordic Council and also the reports that we need a clear action plan. We see that some of the answers we've got are not clear, but we need to get the replies that we need. So I would like to thank you all. Naturally, we need to follow up the debate in the Nordic Council and also to follow up Bjørn Bjarnason's report. Thank you. Thank you, Odni. Well, those were the last words of this debate, and they were good words, so thank you very much. I now propose that we put forward the point of public security, societal security. We have some membership proposals that we need to vote on. This means that you need to open your voting system. You have received a link. And you received that on Monday, but I believe that it's been resent to you. And if you then click on the link, then you can open the voting system as you did yesterday. We will start by number 10.1. This is the consideration of the membership proposals regarding a common Nordic link in the 5th generation of mobile network. And of course, this is a very current issue. And Rigmor Ville, you would like to take the floor? Ville Rydman, you need to turn on your camera so that we can see you. Well, actually, I've done that. All right, but now it seems to be working. Yes, President, you have 3 minutes. Yes, everyone can hear me? Good. So, President, members of the Nordic Council, earlier today we've had a topical debate regarding cybersecurity and hybrid threats. And this membership proposal is also linked to those issues. The Nordic Council's Presidium has also supported this motion. Through the increased data transfer capacity, we will also go to a new industrial revolutions, and now we have robotics and AI, but this is not about the individuals, but now it's about autonomous factories and autonomously driven cars that will enable progress. But this will also be used for critical societal functions and military functions. And the development of the 5G network has also resulted in extensive discussions and also decisions within the European Union, but also within NATO. The strong dependency on the 5G has also required us to identify vulnerabilities vis-à-vis the suppliers of the 5G network. Today, we don't have a common Nordic approach to how we see the security risk linked to the suppliers of 5G network, and this is due to a lack of the legislation foundations that the various Nordic countries have. But this also contrasts the ambition to extend Nordic collaboration and also defense collaboration, and also work to strengthen cybersecurity. So this question is even linked to the broader issue that we don't have sufficient legislation to prevent foreign investments in critical infrastructure in several Nordic countries. And by way of conclusion, I would also like to remind the government regarding the proposals of the Bjarnason's report that also deals with cybersecurity. That's all. Thank you, Ville Rydman. Thank you very much for your interventions on behalf of the Nordic Council. Daniel Riazat, on behalf of the Nordic Green Left, you have the floor. You have 2 minutes.
Och hej till alla ledamöter i Nordiska rådet och till övriga deltagare.
Good morning to all members in this meeting from the Nordic Green Left. We also think it's very important in connection with the 5G network being rolled out in our countries that we take into consideration the safety and security aspects, and that commercial actors and foreign actors they cannot jeopardize our nations and societies. On the other hand, we are reluctant to having a joint opinion on this in all our Nordic countries, which is why we don't think that this proposal is reasonable. We know what's happening when we have a joint position on this. Then you will impose this on the smaller actors, these decisions, which is why we mean that it's not reasonable to do this. We think that it's good if all countries and all members in Nordic Council could make sure that they have an eye on the security aspect, and that countries like China or the US, that they can expose us to this safety threats or security threats. But we don't want a common policy where the independence of the countries is taken away from us. I see that someone has asked for a reply, and this is from Ville. Ville Rydman, you have the floor. 1 minute. Thank you, President. I just want to remind you that we have approved a strategy for Norwegian public security, and in this strategy it is said that the point of departure for this strategy is that the Nordic countries are facing the same challenges within the public security. We're talking about terror attacks, cyber attacks, natural catastrophes, problems with the energy supply, and a lot of others unforeseen events. And when we talk about cyber attack, that is just one part of this strategy, and we have identified the Nordic aspect here, and we want the Nordic Council to keep a common line for all the Nordic countries. And we think that this proposal is in line with what we have already approved and decided within the Nordic Council. Hogni Høydal is the next speaker. Yes, thank you, Daniel, for a good presentation of our opinions. I agree that this proposal or this motion is about 5G investments and 5G infrastructure. And for example, here in the Faroe Islands, we've worked with Huawei and other actors, but then we have had a pressure from Denmark and from NATO, and the threats are not only represented by these actors. I want to underline that when we start talking about tele infrastructure and other infrastructure as security infrastructure, it is also a danger or a risk that the democracy aspect disappears. For example, for Faroe Islands and Greenland, the Denmark cannot decide how we want to build out these infrastructures. That is our prerogative. Thank you very much. Yes, I just want to say that I completely agree with what Hogni says in his intervention, and I would like to remind you that this question and this proposal is a common line in security risks in connection with the 5G network. It's also a question of international negotiations on the 5G network. It's also about the fact that the Nordic countries should inform each other on the developments within the 5G network in NATO and EU. So if Sweden, for instance, is subject to wiretapping or something else, this happened by a NATO country via Denmark. So if you want to talk about security matters, I agree that they should be included. But you need to remember this also when we talk about Greenland and the Faroe Islands, that they cannot be subject to other countries when it comes to these questions. So specifically when we talk about the 5G, we think that the nations should decide on their own. Greenland, Sweden, Norway, everyone should decide on their own what they want to do with the 5G question. Yes, thank you. I have no further interventions, so I will now conclude the discussion on this point. Let's move on to point 10.2, Nordic intervention against right-hand extremism and other parts of extremism. And I'd like to give the floor to the spokesperson of the Social Democratic Group from Sweden, who will present this motion. Thank you, President, and thank all Nordic friends. This year, the 22nd July, we have the 10th anniversary for the attack against the government quarters and Utøya in Norway. 77 people lost their lives this day. The Nordic countries and whole of the world were completely shocked and were presenting their sympathies to Norway. Something hard hit us all. And hit us who wants to protect the Nordic values, peace, democracy, rule of law, human rights, and equality. The right-hand ideology was the motivation for this attack, and this is just one of many right-wing attacks in the Nordic countries. And these groups are very well organized in the Nordic countries, and they cooperate across national borders. This is why it's important to enhance the Nordic cooperation if we want to stop these groups and their activities. On behalf of the Presidium, I'd like to thank Nordic Green Left for this very important membership motion. We want to add something to this motion, which is that it should include also all other forms of extremism that threatens our democracy. We need this to cover all levels of society, so we would ask the Nordic Council of Ministers and the Nordic governments that they work on this and all forms of extremism, and that they extend their initiatives across borders in order to counter these forms of extremisms. Thank you very much, and thank you for underlining that this also concerns other forms of extremism as well. Anyone else who wants to have the floor? Daniel Riazata. Thank you, President. Right-wing terrorism is the most common form of terrorism that we have seen in the Nordic countries during this last few years. The worst attack was in Norway, and in Sweden we've also seen violence and attacks from right-wing groups, and in Finland also. Since 2018, this is the most important threat against the society in Finland, which is why the Nordic Green Left means that we need a joint Nordic effort to combat these forms of extremism. We do know that the right-wing extremism is nourished by those who are on that side of the political spectrum. We would have wanted to go further in this question. We would have liked to see more of a focus on the right-wing extremism, but we would like to thank all those who have supported this motion and have made it possible to present a good motion where we shed light on right-wing extremism and other forms of extremism. So we can agree on this wording that has been suggested. I'd also like to say that when we talk about right-wing extremism, we cannot forget the violence and terror that our black siblings are being subject to, and which has been lifted by the Black Lives Matter movement. It's not only something that concerns the USA and countries far away. It is a question that also concerns us in the Nordic countries. So we should keep that in mind when we take up this work on extremism. Okay, I have now Aron Emilsson. You have the floor. Thank you very much, President. I would like to start by thanking the Presidium for a very constructive discussion on this motion from the Green Left, which was originally a bit different from what we see now. It's now more it's a larger motion now and covering all types of threats. We have discussed this thoroughly, and we think that this is a motion where we could benefit from Nordic cooperation, and it is important that this motion covers all forms of extremism that threatens our democracy. I have friends in the political party that is being threatened and physically abused by those who are against us. And that has also happened with other politicians by representative of the extremist left-wing movement. And this is an attack against our democracy. And from both sides, it's just as serious if we talk about the right-wing extremism, the Muslim extremism, or the left-wing extremism. They are all dangerous for our democracy. And it's important that we safeguard and defend our Nordic values. So I support the change of this motion so that it covers all forms of extremism. Thank you, Aron. I now have Rika Purra, also from Nordic Freedom. We're just waiting for the incoming audio here. Yes, thank you, President. This seems to be a good point of departure, the fact that we do not only talk about one extremist group, but that we include all extremist groups, because we also have problematic groups not only on the right-wing extremist side. In Europe, we have extreme Islamism, and when the security police in Finland also says that this is a big threat. So it would be difficult to only talk about one form of extremism. It's important to see all the different risk factors that are targeting the Nordic societies, and that's not only from the right-wing extremism, which is why I strongly support the fact that we say that this should conclude, that we should include also the general extremism, also the violence that we see in the streets that we have seen increasing in Sweden, for instance. I have a reply, first of all, from Høgni Høydal. You have 1 minute. President, dear friends, this motion from Nordic Green Left has now been extended in order to focus more on other forms of extremism. And I think we all can agree on that. But I do feel sad when I hear Nordic Freedom saying that each time it's a question of right-wing extremism, we need to extend that to all other forms of extremism. In Nordic Council, we can also have motions against other forms of extremism, religious and other extremisms. But I feel sad about this. When we talk about Breivik in Norway, for instance, they always want to talk about other forms of extremism. We have to focus on the extremisms we've seen in the Nordic country. So I think that when you try to twist this into another direction, I don't feel at ease. Yes, I don't think it's very strange that these groups are taking up this question over and over again when we talk about right-wing extremism. But today I would like to say that the shootings in Sweden has nothing to do with this. The fact that we have criminality in our countries has nothing to do with the ideology, the right-wing ideology that goes against people that are black or brown. This is not the same thing. Criminality is not the same thing as ideologically motivated terrorism. So I think you need to make a distinction here. As I said, we agree with the proposal from the Presidium, and we already have adopted it. But I'd like to make you aware how they try to whiter out these problems that we have with right-wing extremism. Right. Paula for a reply, and then I have Aron and Stefan on the speakers list. Thank you, President. Yes, it is said that the Presidium proposes that we also include other extremist groups, so I don't think why people feel uneasy when we suggest this. Extremism is extremism. Whenever there's a threat against the autonomy of people and their safety, should be included wherever these threats come from. Right, you have the floor for a reply, 1 minute. Thank you, President. I didn't really understand this speak from Høgni Høydal against Nordic freedom. We have discussed this. We have discussed initiatives from the Presidium, and we have adjusted and adapted this proposal in order to say that we should combat all forms of extremism. I think we all agree on this, so why don't we do that? All the way from right-wing, left-wing, Christian extremism, all these should be considered as threats. And many of us are subject to all these extremist attacks. Nothing to do with the fact that we don't look upon all sorts of extremisms as the same. We have made a declaration of solidarity between all our parliaments and all our political groups. Ivan, yes, I would like to say that it's a very strange rhetoric from the Nordic Green Left. I don't think you can talk about watering out something if you add something to a motion, and I think it's unreasonable to add something. The people that were against the Jews, the first of all were the Muslims, then the left-wing extremists and the right-wing extremists. So we find this in all groups, and we need to combat this or counter this. So I think it's important to understand this correctly. I think the rhetorics here are damaging, and I hope that the Nordic Green Left will present their excuses to the colleagues. I have 2 replies. I need to see who gets to speak in the last instance here. I give the floor to you first, Daniel. Thank you very much, President. No, I will never present my excuses to representatives of parties who are based on a right-wing environment, but that's not the question here. The question here is the motion from the Presidium, and we support this. But I do believe that it's important that we have this discussion, because this is exactly what the security police in the different countries consider to be a big threat. So I haven't said that other forms of extremism should not be opposed. I do that every day when we talk about Kurdic group that are countering the religious fundamentalism in Syria. But we do know that for our countries that the biggest threats during several years has been the right-wing extremism. But that being said, we are supporting the motion from the Presidium. Høgni Høydal, you have 1 minute. I can reassure Nordic Freedom that all of us in the Nordic Green left, we support all declarations and statements against extremism, ideological, religious, and other forms of extremism. And we have just extended this motion. And it's just the fact that I feel bad by the fact that each time right-wing extremism is mentioned, they want to include the other forms of extremisms. It's a little bit like Trump when there was an attack against the Congress. He wanted to speak about something else. Now we have diluted this a bit. We don't focus exactly on right-wing or left-wing extremism because there are also other forms of extremism, like religious extremism. Lulu Rana, you have asked for the floor. You have 1 minute. Lulu Rana. Thank you, President. I'm very sad when I'm listening to this discussion because we all agree that all forms of extremism that are threatening our democracy, our daily lives, our safety, must be we have to stand together to fight against this. Ideology and strange thoughts about other peoples who wants only to do good for Nordic people, that you hear these kind of statements. Violence against women and children, that is the worst thing you can hear about. And it is not only one group who have committed such crimes. And that's why we need to stand together and fight all forms of extremism that is the cause that our wonderful Nordic countries are not as safe as they used to be. So I hope we can do this together and not speak bad about other political parties or groups. It's very important that we stand together in order to fight these terrible crimes and this terrible extremism. I see that Mikko Kinnunen wants to make a reply. Yes, I will speak in Finnish. All these perspectives show us that the Presidium was wise in extending this motion to include all forms of extremism and threats. This is this is a mission we have in common. It's important that we treat each other with respect. Thanks you for your kind words. I think that was a good end to this debate. I don't have any more names on the list of speakers, and this discussion is closed. Let's move on to item 10.3. This is a quick item, also the voting. This is how we should tackle the corona crisis in a Nordic perspective. I'd like to first to give the floor to the spokespersons of the Presidium. Michael Techner, you have the floor. Mikael, you need to turn on your microphone. Yes, I think I'm on now. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yes, I just would like to say that the member motion from the Conservative group has been supported in its substance for the major parties of this, because the Presidium has delivered a mandate for a comparison of the experiences with COVID-19. And we've also had a discussion where we emphasize all the learning points here. If this based on the pandemic we've been through, but also a common preparedness when civil threats are threatening our societies. So I would just refer you to what has been included in the Presidium's presentation of this mandate. We're talking about a preliminary report describing the theme and the topic. This should be delivered by September and then should report it back during the first half of 2022. And there has even been funds reserved for this, 500,000 Danish kroner to do this work. So if there are any differences in nuances between the motion from the Conservative group and the Secretariat with the support of the Presidium, that this perspective will be included in our proposal or resolution. So if you can approve this, I can withdraw our proposal, because this has been taken into account by the very kind treatment of this proposal by the Presidium. Thank you. Okay, 3 brief speeches now. Martin Kolberg first.
Bertil får svare på vegne av presidiet, men på vegne av den sosialdemokratiske.
On behalf of the Social Democratic Group, we don't have any problem with what Michael is now saying. And we also endorse this motion broadly. For the next generation of members of the Nordic Council and its experience with the COVID pandemic, then of course how we deal with the next crisis and pandemic will also be important. But I think that even though the collaboration between the Nordic countries is very good, we also see that from the experience we have with this crisis, there are many matters to address. One thing we dealt with yesterday, that is linked with legislative collaboration, that is legislative coordination in many areas, and that it should also then embrace public security and the emergency and contingency planning efforts. There should be better alignment, and there should also be more contact between governments when adopting these measures, and that we also build up a stronger Nordic response to such challenges. And Bertil, I'm sure that you will pursue this matter because you're a grand old man in this work. I believe that it's very important that we also understand that we have to delve deep into and also challenge the independence of national states if we're going to make progress on the Nordic joint collaboration. That's a breaking point. If we're going to have better coordination at the Nordic level during the next crisis. So we support the motion. Next speaker, Anders Eriksson, representing the Centre Group. You have 2 minutes. Yes, President, the Centre Group, we also see what the work that the Presidium has done, but for the whole group, it's important that we can put in place Nordic coordination of these matters. When I heard Michael Tetzschner say that this assessment should be ready by September, then it is important to put this in place so that we are better equipped to deal with the next crossroad because, for example, this pandemic has shown that we need joint communication. And we have also seen as societies have shut down that third parties also are involved. And we have see that the Nordic collaboration doesn't work well enough. And we also see that we are all impacted, and the question is, how can we also deal with the social and economic consequences? And this has also been mentioned by the Presidium. But the way the Presidium is dealing with this, and also its assessment, I feel that there's also a risk if we task an external research institute with this kind of assessments. I think we should set up a high representative working groups and directly under the ministers in charge. And we in the Centre Group support the proposal, and we believe that we should drive the assessment in the way that is expressed. And finally, Christian Juhl, you have the floor. Thank you. And thank you to the Conservative group for the proposal. And it is probably all in line with all the parties and groups' experiences through the pandemic. We need to learn from our experiences and all countries' experiences. And along the way, no one has really known what the best method is. When should we then open or close borders during such a pandemic? Suddenly, if we face a new situation, will medication get to its destination quickly enough, and how are we going to distribute it? All these issues were new to all our states and also to the civil servants. They seem to know everything, but I believe it's important that we address this matter in a very serious matter here. And how the various countries have dealt with it, well, they've dealt with it very differently. And it is important that we get some clarity on the methods and strategies applied, clarity about how we could have possibly developed our own vaccine. But another important question is that we need clarity about how we can get the whole planet vaccinated. Global approaches is also important, and here our states' experiences are also important in that global context. What is the strategy that we have applied to vaccinate our population, and how will we do this going forward? And we also want to help realize the analysis so that we can also use it to deal with future crises. And the next crisis may be the crisis that the next generation who are not taking these measures very seriously, that they will have to deal with. Thank you for this debate. It has demonstrated that there is great support for the proposals. Well, when we agree, there are two options. One thing is that, all right, we agree, so that we don't need to put it to the vote because we do agree on the matter. Another option is that we adopt it. And Michael Tetzschner, I have to ask you, if you believe that we should withdraw our proposal or if we should adopt it. You indicated that you might be willing to withdraw your proposal, but it could also be in view of the broad support that you believe that we should adopt it. All right, it's up to you, Michael. Well, if there is full support, well, that falls within the remit of our work, so they don't compete with one another. I would be very grateful if one could also expressly endorse it. All right, thank you. Then we'll move to the vote. First, item 10.1, concerning the security of the 5th generation mobile network. Those in favor vote yes. Those who don't support it vote no. And if you don't know, then you abstain. And we open the vote now. And you have 10 seconds left to cast your vote. And I can see that members are voting and that the vote is in progress. And then we close the vote. And we will open the vote and leave it open for a bit. We have 34 in favor, 9 against, no abstentions. Actually, we need to repeat the vote to be quorate. There are more members than those voting, so we will replicate the vote. So please cast your vote again. We have now opened the vote. Please cast your vote. I apparently need to be a bit more patient. You have 10 more seconds. I think that we have our results. Then we'll end the vote, and then please give us the results of the vote. All right, we have now 38 votes in favor, 9 against, 0 abstentions. So this resolution has been adopted. Next, we'll put motion 10.2 to the vote, and this was the highly debated proposals regarding the Nordic efforts against right-wing extremism. And there were also other forms of extremism mentioned. We open the vote. Please cast your vote. You have 10 seconds left. All right, we now close the vote. And the results are as follows. 48 votes in favor, no one against, and no abstentions. Thank you. And then the last motion, namely item 10.3, regarding the COVID-19 crisis in a Nordic perspective. Those in favor of the proposal vote yes. If you are against it, you vote no. And if you don't know, then you abstain. We open the vote. Please cast your vote. All right. The vote is hereby closed. And we'll get the results up on the screen in a minute. And again, 48 votes voted yes, 0 voted no, and no abstentions. If someone had the problem with the voting, then please send us a mail. But these motions have now been addressed and we have voted on them. We'll now have a 10-minute break. Thank you very much for appearing in such an orderly fashion during the debate, and thank you for a good discussion.
Hej, Liv eller Sara, kan dere høre meg der borte? Takk. Hei, Liv. Jeg kan se at det er et sammenfall mellom kontrollkomiteens møte og det ekstraordinære møtet i presidiet i morgen klokken 9, hvor Ruth Grung og Maria Stockhaus fra kontrollkomiteen skal delta i presidiets møte.
Hej Berit, jeg kan høre dig nu.
Kan du høre meg? Nej, jeg ringer til dig, Liv. Undskyld.
Ja. En, to. Martin Kolberg, hører du meg?
Vi hører deg ved denne anledningen. Det ikke alltid vi hører på deg, men nå hører vi deg. Vi det. Vi her.
Ja, men så bra.
Jeg ser deg ikke enda, men du på plass.
Har dere hatt et godt møte så langt?
Ja, det ble litt lite med deltakelse i denne diskusjonen om cybersikkerheten.
Ja.
Da var det jo ikke noen norske ministre heller.
Nei, nettopp. Skulle det ikke være det, eller?
Jo. Men det kom ingen.
Nei.
Du kunne ikke du heller? Antageligvis vet du ikke om det.
Jeg får hvisket i øret at vi fikk invitasjon sent i går, men da var det booket til et annet møte.
Ja, det var litt før, tror jeg, men det ikke så farlig. Men det var jo andre mer primære ministre. Men la oss ikke snakke mer om det. Vi hører deg veldig tydelig.
Ja, men det høres bra ut. Da ses vi.
Det gjør vi.
Thank you and welcome back. We are now going to start with the penultimate item on the agenda, namely a question and answer sessions with the ministers for cooperations, and this is something that we value, to have the opportunity to discuss directly with Finland. We have the Minister for Finland, Denmark, Greenland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden and Åland. They are in place, and we also look forward to talking to them. And we have some special rules that apply. Each of the representatives of government have 3 minutes to the introductory speech if they want to take the floor. Afterwards, we open the floor for others also to participate in the following way. Spokespersons for the party groups of the Nordic Council has 1 minute for questions. Representatives of the governments have then 1 minute to respond. The president can then give the floor to members for 1 follow-up questions. And the president can also hear if other representatives of government want to supplement their response. And after the spokesperson of party groups have asked their questions, we also open up for questions from other members if you want. In order to ask for a reply or a rebuttal, then you need to signal that during the speech or intervention or at the end of them, and then press raise hand icon. In order to sign on the list of speakers, you need to sign your name or write your name in the chat. And ministers will then take the floor in order, and will open for the presidency of Finland to ask the floor first. And as I said, the ministers will have 3 minutes. First, I want to ask Finland's Minister for Cooperation and Minister for Gender Equality, Thomas Blomqvist. Do you want the floor? You have up to 3 minutes. All right. Thank you, Chair. The pandemic and measures related to how we manage the pandemic in Finland has, of course, led to discussions regarding Nordic cooperation and the state of Nordic cooperation. A discussion that we know will be very critical, and is very critical. Here we need to bear in mind that this situation has been exceptional. The pandemic put all countries and governments on the sideline with regarding to solutions, and all the Nordic governments have had to make quick and difficult decisions. What we can take with us as lessons learned during this time is, of course, things that we can also use for future challenges and continue to cooperate. But we have had a constructive mindset to discuss various issues among our countries, and also to exchange experiences and find joint solutions in line with Nordic interests. And during the crisis, then the ministers for cooperation have had issues on their agenda ever since the pandemic broke. And Nordic cooperation is a very important element of this cooperation, and also decisions regarding cooperative and sustainable Nordics. We have initiated initiatives that will also help us navigate in such matters going forward. Of course, during our presidency, we have also collaborated with the Minister of Foreign Policy to integrate issues and also to identify consequences, and we have also carried out a structural analysis to look at the various experiences in the Nordics, and the mapping is done by Jan-Erik Erikstam, and is also going to report on the opportunities for Nordic cooperation going forward, and also regarding the Nordic Council of Ministers, and also to formulate solutions. And we're also broadly working to secure supply and emergency planning regarding mapping that the Ministers for Cooperation ordered some months ago. And we will know who will do this mapping over the next few weeks. My position, I'm sure that my other colleagues will share, is that the most important thing is that we learn from the work that is done, and that we can move forward in the Nordics in a very strong manner. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Blomqvist, for your important input, and I now move to Sigurd Ingi Johansson. No, sorry. First, Minister representing Greenland, namely Kirsten L. Fenker, who is the Deputy Minister for Health Affairs. All right, Kirsten, you have the floor. You have 3 minutes, and I apologize for overlooking you a minute. Thank you. We've had good collaborations during the COVID pandemic with the Nordic countries, and we are happy for it. For example, we have worked very well with the West Nordic countries, especially when it comes to information, where we've shared information regarding the management and handling of the COVID pandemic. We've also had a good logistic cooperation with the Arctic Command that has helped transport vaccines and personnel to the most rural areas and towns. We've also worked concretely to keep the virus from entering our countries, and not to put too much pressure on our health services, because they have had they've been very busy also during the pandemic, so this has been critical for us. And we have therefore implemented very strict rules for quarantining, and also travelers from abroad also need to go into quarantine before they can reach their destination. We have focused on hygiene measures. Also to communicate information to our citizens, and also to ensure reporting of new cases. From the 1st of July, we are somewhat reducing restrictions, especially for those fully vaccinated. They don't have to go into quarantine. But then, of course, they also need a negative test in the past 24 hours, on also tracing and testing measures, and comply with those measures. We have a positive view to Nordic initiatives in this area, and also to share knowledge and experiences from how we have dealt with these crises. Thank you, Kirsten, for your valuable input and report from the northernmost corner. Next, the Icelandic Minister for Cooperation, Sigurd Ingi Johansson. You have 3 minutes. Please go ahead. Yes, some technical problems, but here I am. Mr. President, I would like to say a few words about the situation in Iceland. Last Friday we lifted all restrictions regarding quarantine, and we are following the European countries. This means that we have no we have no mandatory measures in terms of quarantining or use of face coverings or masks. So we are now more or less back to normal. 87% have received the first jab, and about 60% have been fully vaccinated. And this is up to 97% of all people age 60 and above that have received the vaccine. And how we've also seen that the most recent variants of the mussels have been prevented from transmitting because of the testing, isolation, quarantining, and tracing and quarantining. And because we have a high level of trust, this has also meant that people have quarantined and also complied with day-to-day measures. In Iceland, we have focused on keeping schools open to children to avoid disrupting everyday activities and schooling for the youngest. I would also like to say that on the subject of Nordic cooperation, it is important. It's important to also safeguard Nordic collaboration during times of pandemics, and we need to strengthen cooperation. The virus has greatly impacted on the free movement between the Nordic countries, as you all know, and free movement is a basic freedom that we have in the Nordics, and it has also impacted on the trust that people has in the Nordic cooperations. We need to be better prepared next time, and I would like to leave you all with that because we are dependent on this trust. Thank you. Thank you, Sigurður. And next, Norway's Minister for Cooperation, Jan Tore Sanner. You have 3 minutes. You have the floor. Yes. Dear friends, time has now come to kind of commend Nordic collaboration, because together we are going to help making the Nordic region the most sustainable and best region. This vision and the strategy that we have adopted is also our joint tool to ensure that Nordic also come out of this COVID crisis in strengthened. We have struggled for 15 months, very demanding periods. We have implemented very harsh measures and restrictions locally and nationally. We have worked with one another across the Nordic countries and had a close dialogue both at the political level and professionally. We've chosen different strategies in the Nordics, but the goal has been the same, namely to look after and take care of the health and life of our inhabitants, safeguard jobs, and to make sure that we emerge on the other side of the crisis in a sound way. Some of the measures have been very intervening in Oslo, and some areas have been completely shut down for long periods. The streets have been empty. Grandparents haven't seen their grandchildren for more than a year. Many children and adolescents have had to had digital schooling. We've limited the freedom of people not only to travel between countries, but also to travel within their own country. Measures have been strict, but they've been required. We see that results in Norway are relatively good, both in terms of health and our financial situation compared to many other countries. The ministers for cooperations and also the ministers responsible for various areas have resolved issues. Some have not been possible to solve because of different strategies. In the Nordics, it's important to summarize our experiences to see what we can learn from one another and learn jointly. We need to improve our efforts. We need to prepare for the next crisis and to strengthen our joint efforts. And we have already started this work, as my colleague from Finland already accounted for, and we are now studying how we can strengthen emergency and contingency planning and also to secure supply of products. But I would like to strengthen for ministers for cooperations. The Nordic Council is very important. You have a close contact with the trade union movement, with the public sector and the private sector and its inhabitants. I have had good use of the cooperation with the Norwegian delegation to the Nordic Council, and I'm looking forward to continue good collaboration. Thank you, Jan Tore.
Sveriges samarbejdsminister, og hun hedder Anna Hallberg. Og du har op til 3 minutter, Anna, og værsgo.
I now give the floor to Anna Hallberg, the Swedish Minister for Collaboration. You have 3 minutes. Dear delegates and dear colleagues, ministers, thank you for inviting me to this meeting and together with you discuss one of the most important questions we are facing today. This is management of the pandemic, but also further on, our cooperation in a crisis situation. What have we learned? We can say together that our societies have been put to the test these last year, and the restrictions introduced in order to reduce the infection spread has had impacts, very serious impacts socially and financially. And the trust in the cooperation has been damaged, and that we feel that this is the authorities are further away than before the pandemic. We have had tight connections at minister level, ministry level, and authorities level. But there are also clear that a few pieces in the puzzle are lacking. On Swedish side, we have a strong Nordic model in order to collaborate. And the conclusion is that we need a more structured dialogue, and we need to inform each other before decisions that impacts the national borders, and also look at how we can minimize the negative consequences that we see if we need to close our borders, that we inform about this well in advance. Sweden has also said that the Nordic governments have to take on a joint responsibility for the workers that are cross-border workers. We have seen this for a long time, that we have people living and working in each other countries, and we need to take into consideration this so that their existence will work. Hopefully we will reach the see light in the tunnel. We have the vaccination, and we are opening up faster the society after the restrictions. We have some more problems. We hear from our inhabitants that the daily life doesn't work. The long queuing up at the borders is one example. It should be simple to live in the Nordics and cross the national borders. We are now in a very particular situation in Sweden because we are in a transition between governments, and I would, of course, take part in this session and I'll answer any questions about this last year. Despite these limits, I can reassure you that we will continue the work together with the Nordic Council, with the Free Movement Council, in order to solve problems. We have focus on this, and we need to move from word to action and to rebuild the trust in the Nordic societies, and that is really the basis for all the collaboration in the Nordic countries. We need to safeguard this at all times. Thank you very much, Anna, and good luck with the work on getting a new government. We see that the ministers are represented here, which is a good thing. Let's move on to one of the strong voices in Åland, the Minister for Collaboration, Annette Holmberg Jansson. You have 3 minutes, and the floor is yours. Yes, you need to unmute your microphone, Annette. Can you hear us, Anette? You need to unmute your microphone so that we can hear you. Anette, could you try to solve this problem, and we'll revert to you later on. And while you're solving these technical problems, we will start now with the Social Democratic Group, and the spokesperson is Lars Mejern Larsson from Sweden. You have the floor, Lars Mejern. Thank you, President. And collaboration is the way forward. That is very clear. That's also what we heard from the ministers right now. To close the borders during this pandemic has shown us how integrated our countries are, especially when we get these strong restrictions. I understand many of the Norwegian measures in order to limit the spread of the infection. But everything is not so simple to understand for me or others. Throughout this pandemic, I've heard stories and I've seen myself how the entry rules are complicating the life for romantic partners, workers, people with holiday homes in Sweden, and so forth. And it's very important for our commuters, cross-border commuters. It's been extremely important. It's been very creating a lot of worries, and maybe we wouldn't have all the queues on the roads if we didn't have these restrictions. Somebody told me, help us, we are driving all along. So I would like to ask the Norwegian minister what they are concretely doing now in order to live up to our vision, which is to be the world's most integrated region, and restore the trust in the Nordics as a borderless region. Okay, Jan Tore, you have the floor. Yes, you're completely right. It's been a lot of frustration and big challenges for many people at the border crossing. But as I said in my intervention, there has also been strong restrictions on internal travel in Norway, and the most important thing we do in order to realize the vision of an integrated Nordics is to fight against the infection. It's first when we've won this fight against the corona pandemic that we can open up, that we can integrate and get back to the Norway that we know from before. It will be easier for many people now because the infection rate is going down in many regions in the Nordic countries, and because we have this corona passport, which makes it's easier for those who are protected to travel. But I would once again thank you for our collaboration in order to solve the border problems during the crisis. For some problems we've found solutions, but not for others, because we have different perspectives on the import infection. Let's try again with Anette Holmberg Jansson from Åland. Welcome, you have the floor. Is Anette from Åland connected? No? Okay, then we will move on to the next question while we wait for our friend from Åland to be connected. And that is Kjell Arne Ottosson. Yes, and remember that you have 1 minute for your question. Thank you, President. During 1.5 years now, we've been experiencing a very strange period, especially those of us who live near to the border. We've seen people who have been impacted very harshly by strange rules. Every week I hear stories about people, Swedish people, who have been bullied at work. I have also mentioned this during one of the sessions that we had before. A person who have lived in Norway for 15 years, he's married there, but he is a Swedish citizen. And so he can't eat together with his colleagues. He can't live with other people. Despite the fact that he's been living in Norway for 15 years, he is Swedish, so this is what happens to him. And there are a lot of stories like this. I would like us to well, I hear that the minister from Norway says that we've had problems that haven't been solved. But if you don't understand the problems, you cannot solve them. How is it possible for someone living in the capital area, and how can a person like that understand such problems? This is really creating leaving very hard scars on the collaboration. I need to hear from Jan Tore. Yes, I don't think it was a concrete question, but as I've already mentioned, I think all of us can understand the challenges in these border areas, but this is not the only place where strict restrictions have been in place. In Oslo, we've had a lockdown for many months. The children, the young people have been homeschooled. The children have been working from home. Grandparents haven't been able to see their grandchildren. And there is one reason for having these strong restrictions. It is because COVID-19 is a fatal disease. This is why we need to have these strict restrictions in place. So we need to learn from the time we have put behind us. I agree with Anna Hallberg when she says that we need to be better in informing people so that they understand the measures we have put in place. So we need to learn from this. But it's important for me to underscore that these strong measures have been necessary and have been supported largely in Norway, and this from a health perspective. Thank you. Before we continue, let's hear to reply. First of all, from Bertel Haarder. Yes. First of all, I would like to thank Jan Tore Sanner for recognizing that Norway has to have a very harsh line to commuters from Sweden, Denmark, and probably also from Finland. I don't think he has been admitted this right now, but we will meet again in November. And in November, we need to hear another tune from the ministers for collaboration. It's not enough to say that it was necessary, because many of the measures were not necessary. And you can read this in the reports published by the Council of Ministers of all these disruptions during the pandemic. So I hope you will take an autocritic, and that you will say that this is something we will do differently the next time. It's fine to make mistakes, because this is something we haven't tried before. But now we have tried this, and it is extremely important that we have a better collaboration next time. And this was addressed to Jan Tore Sanner. Okay, Jan Tore, you have the floor. Yes, I agree with Bertel Haarder. Of course, we need to learn from how we've handled this crisis. But in Norway, we have a broad support for the measures that we have put in place. And one of the big discussions in Norway has been related to the question of the import of the infection during the autumn, particularly during the autumn of 2020, when the infection rate increased because of cross-border movements. So these measures have received a broad support politically and also amongst the public. But of course, that doesn't mean that we can't do this better the next time, because it's obvious that we need to learn from how we've handled this crisis, both nationally, locally, and in a Nordic perspective. I now see that we might have a connection with Åland, so I will bid a warm welcome to Annette Holmberg Jansson. I'm glad to hear that you're connected. I'm very sorry about this hiccup. Yes, okay. First, I saw 2 minutes. I had 3%. Presidents, delegates, and minister colleagues. The ongoing pandemic has impacted our population. The closure of the borders, the testing, and all restrictions has been a very hard test for our common labor market and the mobility that we previously had in the Nordics. And of course, those who are living in the border regions have been hugely impacted. We have a big responsibility to maintain and defend all these structures that we have created during the Nordic collaboration, especially those who have a life where they are living in a border region. This is extremely important if we want to be the world's most integrated and sustainable region. It should be a Nordic bubble when we are facing future crisis. I'm very glad that we have now been able to hold the first in-person meetings just before the midsummer festivities. This has been made possible because of the increased vaccination. We have a stable situation in Åland. We have 10 on 100,000, 85% vaccinated, and 25% have received 2 jabs. And people are very willing to get vaccinated in Åland. We've had a lot of good decisions taken this year, and luckily enough, we haven't seen any deaths caused by COVID-19, and very few old people have fallen ill with COVID-19. I think that this is because of the measures we have implemented. We have had a public that has really respected the rules, also for those arriving in Åland having from abroad. Good communication. Once we had press conferences once a day, now once a week. And the social control in this small community has been very good. Of course, everyone knows if someone has done something outside of the rules. And the media have also been a part of this. We had 70,000 entries between June and March from Sweden, and we only recorded 27 cases between people living in Åland, not tourists. So we have good research on this, and we've been able to manage the situation. We have a voluntary quarantine for 7 days, no testing, and that has been very successful for us here in Åland. Thank you very much, Annette. I'm glad we could hear from Åland. Let's go back to the party groups. We need to hear the people on the speakers' votes first. Mikael Tetzschner, Conservative Group Norway. You have 1 minute, Mikael Tetzschner. Thank you very much. My question goes to Anna Hallberg. If you look at the number of deaths caused by COVID-19, it seems like Sweden has managed this pandemic very poorly. compared to the other Nordic countries? Is this the expertise who has failed or the politics that have failed? Or has Tegnell had too big power or too much power in Sweden? Thank you for that. Anna Hallberg, you have the floor. It's clear that Sweden has been impacted harder than the other Nordic countries. We have established a Corona Commission in Sweden, and we will analyze the consequences of this. And this will be reported. There are a lot of explanations, but no answers to this. We've seen countries in the EU which have had a complete lockdown and have been impacted harder than Sweden. So the explanation for this, we do not know this yet. Is it the travelers, geography, people living close together in the big cities, or other factors? It could also be the restrictions and the way we have handled the pandemic. We don't have any answer as of yet, and I think also that we need to look at the comparison on the efficiency for the fight against the pandemic, and we need to compare also with other countries than the Nordic countries. But of course, within the Nordics, we have been the hardest impacted, but we need to be patient, and we will see when the report is ready. Thank you, Anna. Next person is Veronica Honkasalo, Nordic Green Left, Finland. You have the floor. Dear Minister, President, Nordic colleagues, we have had this pandemic, and the restrictions have been very, very difficult for the cultural field and the concert field. Many of the artists have been completely excluded during this pandemic. It's been very difficult for freelancers, and many artists have had very irregular income. It does not help that we also see a massive reduction of the Nordic Council's education budget. I think it's really difficult to understand how you can reduce these income flows for the very harshly impacted cultural field and concert field. What can you do in order to create or facilitate a recovery for this field today? Yes, Veronica, do you want to address this question to Minister? Otherwise, I will give you my reply. Could be any one. I think all ministers could answer this. I think it's an important question that concerns everyone.
All right, we'll send it to Thomas Blomqvist to start with. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your question. A very appropriate question, and of course you also voiced some concern that we all share. We know that the area of art and culture have been severely impacted by the pandemic. Of course, each Nordic country makes their own decisions regarding support schemes and also culture support to actually make up for the ramification of the pandemic. Of course, there are also some matters that end up on the table of the Ministers for Cooperations, especially the ministers responsible for culture in the Nordic Council. The new vision was approved in the autumn of 2019, and then, of course, we wanted to move the Prime Minister's focus to integration and sustainability. And, of course, that also had impact on the budget. Culture is very important for Nordic collaboration. And It's also one of the major budget areas, and we monitor the situation and how it develops very carefully. But of course, the cuts are due to the current situations. And of course, we need to take the money from somewhere. That was the brief answer. Chair, well, of course, it was typical that a Finnish member asked Finn about that, but we had to do that. But ministers are entitled to, if they want to make a brief comment to any questions, to raise their hand, as everyone else. We'll move on to representatives of the parties, and I will recommend that if you have questions, please put them to concrete and specific ministers, and you decide who that minister would be. Next question is from Aron Emilsson. Thank you, Chair. If the borders had not been so severe then between the Nordic countries, then we would have increased trade of 146%, equivalent to 50 billion, and it just shows that there is an untapped potential in increased collaborations, regardless of what you want to subject the collaboration to. My question is to ministers and maybe perhaps Thomas Blomqvist. What mechanisms can better coordinate legislative directives, EU directives in our areas to try to remove obstacles to freedom of movement across our borders? Thank you. Mr. Blomqvist, you have the floor. Minister, thank you for an appropriate question. It's difficult to give you an exact answer, but I want to say that I share your view that there is an untapped potential in the Nordic collaboration, and that concerns particularly what Emilsson also addressed. We're thinking that we could create the best mobility and integrated everyday life within our Nordic region, but we do a lot of work on digitalizations and also when it comes to introduce and digital ID. That is one thing that would facilitate matters, but we also have expertise on the circular economy within certain sectors, and we believe that there's also work to be done there. And also to collaborate with the Council for Freedom of Movement. They are also working on this, but it is important to better improve conditions to tap the potential for increased trade. All right, next, Anders Eriksson, representing the Center Group from Åland. Thank you. I hope that I'm not too undiplomatic, but I also state that we have not succeeded in keeping the Nordic region integrated. We closed our borders and it's been difficult to do business, travel, that has been essential. The COVID crisis has not been handled well at the Nordic level. I think it's important that we simply face up to that and simply state it before we move on to discuss what we can learn from it. The question is first, what can we do to prevent Nordic inhabitants from ending up in the same situations next time out? I fully respect for the fact that it's been difficult to make decisions, but a lot of things have not been working well. We've heard about that in many different contexts. The question is now, we'll task someone with making an assessment. We'll get the report in September. But of course, we are quite good at the Nordic Council to produce reports, but we also need concretely to implement them. So my question is, what are we specifically going to do in order to questions? And I can direct my question to Mr. Blomqvist, my own Minister for Cooperation. Well, he is a lucky man. He is getting a lot of questions. Minister, thank you. Thank you for your question. First, I want to say that I also share Norway's Minister Jan Tore Sanner's view, and we need to bear in mind that the responsibility for life and health of our inhabitants lies with the national governments. They make their own decisions. But I can also share Anders Eriksson's view, namely that there are issues that we can learn a lesson from, especially in border areas. We have some explicit projects that are going. Like I said, we have tasked a committee with a strategic analysis, and also we've got some proposals of how we can do things better, and also the impacts on the restrictions on entry and what such consequences are. That's important. We want to improve performance, and it's very important to state that there is a lot to be learned here. We will learn our lessons, and we believe that next time around we will do things better. But of course it is impossible to make any predictions regarding the next crisis, and I'm sure that there will also be a lot of unexpected consequences like we've seen here. Thank you. Next speaker is Perana Hawkinson, representing the Social Democratic Group and Sweden. Thank you, Chair. Yes, there are many conclusions that you can draw and analysis you can make, and we can also wait for it to see how the COVID pandemic has been handled in various Nordic countries. But I made a note of one thing, and based on the studies we've seen, is also the socio-economic impact that the spread of the virus has had, and also the what we've seen from infection rates, and also how various countries have been affected by the pandemic, and how it has impacted the people in everyday situations. And also there are also aspects regarding equality that hasn't been imported. But regardless of which country we're talking about, Thomas Blomqvist is also Minister for Gender Equality, and maybe he can comment on my questions from your role. How do you think we should move forward, and how can we strengthen the Nordic cooperations from such a perspective? Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your question. Well, clearly, this crisis, as most crises, also impact people in different ways, and also based on differences in socio-economic conditions. We also see different impacts on people. And there are, of course, different vantage points. I'm the Minister for Gender Equality for Finland, and I have discussed this with my colleagues in Norway countries, and we need to focus particularly in how this crisis has impacted on gender equality efforts. We also know that sectors have also seen different impacts depending on whether they've been dominated by women labor or men labor. We also know that violence, for example, in close relations and domestic violence have also increased during the crisis. In Finland, I can say that when the government has made decisions regarding compensation and also support from those impacted by the crisis, we have also focused on this from a gender equality perspective and made some assessment there. We've also had that at the higher levels. The government has tried to observe this and focus on, and it's also been a subject for discussions at the Nordic level between ministers with such responsibility. But this is something that we need to monitor and be aware of, because the crisis is not over yet and the impacts will continue, and this is something that we need to have continued focus on. Jan Tore Sanna also want to respond on behalf of Norway. Thank you. This is a very important question that you raise, because there's no doubt that this crisis has also had a disproportionate consequences, both in terms of the magnitude and also when it comes to companies. 90% of our economy has seen growth during the crisis, while 10%, those who live off people being able to meet, like transport, culture, tourism, have been severely hit. And it's professions with low salary, weak affiliation with the labor market, and also not much training and education have been affected. We also focus on mental health and those who suffer more on the crisis, but also children and young people who have lost valuable time at school and universities, and how they have coped. But there will be some long-term effects, particularly when it comes to long-term unemployment, that we need to maintain focus on, and it's important that we collaborate and that we can also exchange views on what measures that seem to be most effective. Thank you. Back to the list of speakers, and I also know that some of you have signed on the list of speakers and that some of you also have raised your hand. But next speaker is Kjell Arne Ottosson. He is representing the Center Group and Sweden. Yes, you can hear me. All right, I think I wanted to reply to Jan Tore Sanna, therefore I raised my hand. The latest figures that I now have come from weekend 17 and 18. Week 17, of all travelers on entry, 0.3% gave positive results, and 0.2% in week 8 were positive. And still, they hide themselves, or Norway hide themselves behind the risk of imported cases, as they've done throughout the pandemic. But now we see that queues at the border are enormously long. Now people then queue up for hours because they can't commute on a weekly basis. They need to commute on a daily business. So there are still people who are entitled and have the right to cross the border simply because the officers controlling the border checkpoints don't know the rules. This doesn't only affect Swedes, it also affects Norwegians, Norwegian families, Norwegian enterprises. Thank you. Chair, well, thank you. I will now conduct this debate based on the list of speakers, because I can see that we have the same persons who are now signed on, and therefore the allotted speaking time is the same, and therefore we will now hear Angelica Bengtsson representing Nordic Freedom from Sweden. Thank you. We've hardly put the pandemic behind us, so we're still in it, but we've seen that we now have the Delta mutation, especially in Sweden. We have a lot to learn from this pandemic, and I believe that many of the obstacles that prevent freedom of movement that we try to do away with are still then giving effects, and we still have a lot to learn. And my question is particularly to the Nordic and Swedish ministers. What lessons have we learned so that we won't see the same obstacles on the border because of the Delta mutant virus that are now spreading across our countries, and particularly in Sweden? Thank you, Angelica, and I give the floor to the Swedish minister. Yes, thank you. It's such an important question that now we need to learn our lessons quickly. We can't wait for 5 or 10 years for the next crisis. It could be that we have to face it this autumn for the reasons that you now highlight. And I will be returning to this, that we need a clearer coordination and dialogue ahead of a crisis rather than when we're in the midst of it. This is not only at the government level, because I think we have relations and channels for doing that, but it's also for our various authorities that need such channels, for example, customs authorities, law enforcement, so that efforts are more coordinated to face this crisis. And again, like I said, we may face a fourth wave or a new crisis this autumn. We need a joint definition. What do we mean when we say, for example, that we have, for example, good reasons or essential reasons to cross the border, so that we also use a similar terminology and also have a joint approach to it. So this autumn we may face such challenges, and I will simply revert to what I've said. I believe that we need to be better coordinated, be better informed, and also join forces now. Thank you, Anna. And again, I want to give the floor to Martin Kolberg, representing the Social Democratic Group of Norway. Actually, I don't have any question. I simply have opinions. And of course, if someone wants to respond, I'm happy to do so. I think we all have to rally behind what Minister Blomqvist said, that it's up to each national state to take responsibility for their own actions and adopt their own rules for their own jurisdictions. I simply think we need to state that, but within that remit, within that framework, it is possible to do things better. I believe that, Jan Tore Sanner and the government in Norway has broad support about the shutdown we've done, but there's also been substantial discussions in Norway how to do that in reality, and I have no problems understanding what Anna Holmberg saying, or that what Lars saying, or Kjell Arne, and also about the examples they give for consequences that is hard to defend. But within my allotted time, I only want to say one thing, particularly to Anna. If we are to succeed with coordination, we also need to coordinate medical strategy. It's not only about border and legal questions. Medical strategy for dealing with a pandemic also needs to be far better coordinated than we've seen in this case, and that is a necessary addition to this matter. Chair, thank you, Martin, and there's also a direct comment to Annika Hallberg, and I will give the floor back to her first, and then I will give the floor to the next speaker. Thank you very much. Only a brief question to Martin's comment. And I also refer to what I said in my earlier speech and answer. Like I said, our public health authorities also need to be better coordinated. And here we also include a better coordinated medical strategy here in this. So all our authorities needs to improve coordination. Anita Holberg Jansson, yes? In Åland, we're a border region, and I sympathize strongly with what Kjell Arne said, namely that there has been some strong challenges during this period. But in Åland, we have consistently, ever since November of last year, said that we will not test people at the border, we will not test travelers. We urge people to voluntary quarantine for 7 days, and we have done some studies. And we have some good research on this, to which extent that the people have complied with the recommendations, and the conclusion is that most people have. abided by them. Of course, it could be because we're a small community, but we have about 30,000, but we have 70,000 travelers entering our region from March to September. But of course, we have different approaches. I respect that all countries have their own approach, but one way of dealing with it is that sometimes maybe we need to allow more flexibility than what I find that the government has had, and also that I listen to many of my inhabitants have. 16% have seen a reduction, and also what Jan Tore Sanner said, of course, mental health issues is something that we're concerned with, and we also see that, for example, the reduction in tourism is also very important, particularly for people who live to a great extent from tourism. So the cutback on traveling is important. Chair, all right, the debate is working well, but Annika Hallberg needs to leave the debate at 3:55. I hope that other ministers can stay and also can respond to some of the questions. We have still many speakers left, and I would like to continue to finish this debate. I don't see anyone objecting. So, Anna, if you need to leave us before we're finished, I would like to thank you for your participation. It's been a pleasure to have you here. Next question is from Simon Holmström, representing the Centre Group, and Åland. You have the floor. Yes, thank you. I had hoped to ask my questions to Anna Hallberg and also on the subject of public health authorities. They have played a critical role in the country's introduction of restrictions. And we've seen across our countries very fragmented COVID strategies with very different impacts. All the people who have participated in the debate have said that we need to learn the lessons, learn from the pandemic and apply it on the Nordic cooperations. But how would you what would you do if we had a common Nordic public health authority that they could monitor the situation in the border regions particularly, but they could also wage a Nordic battle? I can say that we have 3 people who have signed on the list of speakers, and Anna has the possibility to give one more answer, but you choose which one. Unfortunately, it's a bit difficult for me to answer that kind of questions, even though it's very relevant. But even though we are in the situation that we now find ourselves in, we are an interim government. I may want to do this or that, but we'll have to see what the political landscape in Sweden will be as we move forward a couple of weeks. Unfortunately, I need to take your questions and see how we can respond going forward. But of course, I'm happy to reply to some of the questions that have been, but this also concerned the way forward, and we have to wait to clarify. All right, Liselotte, you are the next question. Nordic Freedom, Liselotte Blixt. Yes, please activate your camera and unmute your microphone. Liselotte, are you there? All right. Well, I mean, it seemed to actually to turn itself off. But my question is forward-oriented, because when we hear ministers for cooperation talk about how they've dealt with the pandemic, of course, Now we are in the process of reopening our societies. We think that things are moving forward along, but we've also seen that the Delta mutant is also making its impact, and we've seen that in Israel, where they've also fully vaccinated the population. So how can we talk together in the various ministries across country, because there's huge differences in how much you do testing and also how you respond. In some countries, they don't take many tests. And of course, then if we have countries that don't do much testing, then of course we don't get much research resource. But can you please tell me how you want to deal with this across the Nordics? And who do you want us to ask the question to? Norway's Minister for Cooperation, Jan Tore Sanner. Thank you. It's an important question. I believe that many people feel affected by it because we've celebrated the reopening, we vaccinate people, infection rates are dropping, and then of course all of us are concerned regarding the Delta virus mutant. And in the UK they have put the further reopening efforts on hold because they see that infection rates are increasing, and many countries see it too. So the answer to your question is yes, there is close contact. Norway's health authorities have had particular close contact with Denmark's authorities. We've seen that some of our measures have been similar. So we follow the dialogue across the Nordics, maybe particularly with Denmark, because health authorities also have close contracts. But we also have contact with all the Nordic countries. We see the vaccination is taking effect. We also see that it has some efficacy on the Delta mutant, but if you've only had one shot, then of course you are less protected. So we need to ensure the highest possible vaccination rates and particularly make sure that the vulnerable groups get the vaccine. Thank you, Jan Tore. We have two more left on our list. First one is Staffan Eklöf, representing Nordic Freedom and Sweden. Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Yes, I want Norway's Minister Jan Tore Sanner to reply, but I'm happy if other ministers also want to reply. The future of the Nordic collaboration should also be subject to the various assessments that countries across the Nordics have done and why this is. And of course, as researchers and representing an authority, I believe that the reason why we also have responded to the pandemic can be attributed to the various assessments we have when it comes to interpretation of research, etc. And also that in some countries the use of face coverings are not up to the public health authorities to decide on, not to governments. But of course, that could also be due to different political cultures. My question is that do the other Nordic countries that have been more successful in dealing with the virus have a different view of how they deal with the expert authorities and expertise, or what are the different assessments across the Nordics due to? Jan Tore says that I'm quite certain that scientists and researchers will be spending a lot of time on this going forward. I can tell you what we do in Norway. In Norway, the government makes decisions. We make our decisions regarding restrictions and how to deal with them every single week, and sometimes even more frequently. So it's the government that makes the decision, but our decisions are made by recommendations and advice from the Norwegian Institute of Public Health and the Directorate of Health. So we have two different health authorities that provide advice and recommendations or a thorough report. Sometimes there may also be some different focus and weighting of their recommendations. So they give it to the government and the government makes the decisions. In some cases, we've also had a second opinion. For example, when it came to the use of AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson vaccines, we also asked for a further assessment so that the government could have a broader basis for its decisions. In most cases, we follow the advice and recommendations of the health authorities. In some other matters, we also take a different approach, and that is also when it comes to, for example, shutting down our societies and reopening. Yeah, thank you. The last person to ask a question is Mikko Kinnunen, representing the Centre Group in Finland. You have the floor. Thank you. Yes, I'm here now. I'm very interested in the situation for pupils, and I'm also in the school sector myself. Different countries across the Nordic region have responded in different ways. For example, primary and lower secondary schools have been shut down in many countries, and digital teaching have worked well for some pupils, but for pupils who have more difficulties and struggle more have had more difficult times. It's important that we look at how the various countries deal with it and also do some research on how the various support measures have helped and what has come from it. But my question is, have you actually studied what this has, how schools have impacted to?
Mikko, who is this question addressed to? To all the ministers, but the first one out, the fastest one, will answer. Are any of the ministers willing to answer this last question? Let's see. I see that you are thinking. Yes. I only got the translation at the end of the intervention. But was it the situation in the schools? Was that the question? Yes. But perhaps Annette could try to answer this question. I think that Mikko knows that we have followed the same restrictions that have applied in Finland. So I think it would be more interesting to hear from someone else from the other Nordic countries. I know that Sigurdur in Iceland, you have decided to keep all the schools open during this period. And that was a very conscious choice on your part. So it would be interesting to hear from you about this question, perhaps. All right, Sigurdur and then Thomas. Yes, I can give you an answer. This is a broad question, and it's correct, like Annette says, that we have been very eager to keep all the schools open during the whole pandemic, throughout the pandemic. And I think the result is good. Both the kindergarten and the primary schools have been open during this period, whereas high schools and universities have been on distance education. Parts of the time, but as of January this year, all the schools have been open. And when we have discovered infection cases, we have used a very successful method, which is to track the infection, and then we have had quarantine and isolation. And thanks to these measures, we have been able to keep all the schools open. We think we have less mental problems because of this, but and this has become a big problem also amongst young people. So we have been wanting to keep the schools open, and also the sports activities have been important to keep going. We think the result is good, and we think this has been very helpful for us. And this, as we said just before, this is something which will be researched in the years to come. Right. I will also include Thomas. Thank you, President. Chair, this is a very important question. It's very important for us to exchange our experiences on this. First of all, this is a question that is under the ministers of education in different countries. And as far as I know, there has been contacts both at minister level and also civil servant level in order to learn from one another. We also feel in Finland that it was important for us to keep the schools open, and have tried to do this as much as possible. And we also have had distance education, but I don't know what the results or the experiences are there. So if any research has not been done here, we should start doing that now. It's also important to investigate the consequences of distance education on the pupils and students. That could be a common research project, for instance, but I don't know if this has been decided. Thank you very much. We would like to say thank you very much for your participation during this question time. We always look forward to this because it's an opportunity that we have to exchange our views on what is useful for the Nordic region. It's been a very useful, very lively debate this year, even if we have to accept doing this virtually, just like the pupils and students. We have to do this through a screen. Thank you very much. We've had a lot of questions. Maybe that is because of the technology that we've had so many questions this time. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all the colleagues for good and very important and essential questions that have been answered. The question time is now over, and we will now make a last effort from the meeting secretariat. We will change the order here, but don't take a coffee break, because there will be just a very, very short break before we resume. Thank you very much for your collaboration, and thank you very much for a very good theme session. And I'd like to thank the director for all her help. But now you will see